Hello again, everyone. This is part 2 of my video of how to build a frame for a 14.9-inch LCD Marquee monitor for Arcade1UP. In part 1, you should have built out the frame, gotten painted, and also tested and put it in the Arcade1UP to make sure everything looks okay. So in this part 2 of the series, we're going to finish assembling everything up. And if you're using a Raspberry Pi 2 as the Marquee controller, we'll go over some settings to fix some issues with the resolution and the displaying of marquee files. So with that being said, we will go ahead and start on step 7 of the process. Okay, so now we're going to epoxy the angled aluminum brackets to the LCD monitor. Now, these are the brackets that we adjusted in step 3, where we enlarged the holes on those metal brackets. Those we're going to take those. We're going to put them on what we call the epoxy dowels, and these are the 2.5-inch, 3/4-inch dowels, square dowels that we cut back in step 2. And basically, we're going to epoxy one side of it on each one. We're going to put them on those epoxy dowels, and then we're going to take our 18-inch clamp, and then we're going to put it in between the dowels, and then we're going to clamp it together so that the epoxy seals onto the LCD monitor itself. So when we epoxy this to the angled aluminum to the LCD monitor, we want to make sure of two things. First, we want to make sure the side marquee brackets are centered. And you can just eyeball this. It doesn't have to be exactly centered, but we want to be centered. So you see in the 3 pictures below, the first 2 are wrong. That's not where we want them. And the third picture is correct, where the angled aluminum is centered on the LCD monitor. Second thing you want to make sure is the side marquee brackets are flush with the LCD monitor. So if we're looking at the bottom left side view of this, if you notice that where the gray there, it's the angled aluminum, and the blue is the monitor, and the brown or green there is the epoxy dowel, wood dowel. You notice how the first picture shows the monitor is a little higher, and that would be wrong, and the second picture shows where the monitor is a little lower, and that's wrong. The third picture would be correct, where the angled aluminum pretty much aligns and is flush with the LCD monitor, and that's what we want in order for us to get the brackets on there correctly. Okay, so we got our angled aluminum brackets that we cut in step 3, or enlarged the holes in step 3. And you notice on the monitor there, it has a protective film on it. Do not take that protective film off just yet. We want to keep that protective film on, just for the fact that if any epoxy gets on the monitor itself, it'll get on the protective film, and we won't have to worry about getting that epoxy off. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take some tape. This is our friction tape, and what we're going to do is we're going to tape the inside of the angled aluminum where it's oval, not the one with the holes, but circular holes, but the ones that have the oval holes. And the reason why I do this is because when we epoxy this, we don't want it to seep through into the wood. Because if it seeps through into the wood, it's going to epoxy directly onto that wood, and that's something we do not want. It'll cause because if it epoxies to the wood, you're going to have to try to take it off, and it could rip it off, and you'd have to go through this whole process again. So putting the tape on here prevents it from epoxying onto the wood. So we're just going to once I get the second piece off here, we're going to tape it on there, and once we get it taped on there, we'll get started. Okay, so now once we got taped, I'm just setting them on the brackets here to determine which one's the left and which one's the right bracket. And as you can see, this is how it's going to go. So left, right, and we'll epoxy it on there. So once we do that, then we can go ahead and mix our epoxy. This is the epoxy I use, Gorilla Glue Epoxy Clear. And according to the directions on this, we're just going to squirt it on here. It'll put out the 2 different chemicals or the paste or whatever. And according to directions, we'll mix it for 20 seconds. Now, if you didn't get this particular brand of epoxy, just follow the directions on how on how to mix the epoxy and how to apply it. But in this case, again, according to directions, we mix it for 20 seconds. So once we mix it and everything's good, we're going to put on our latex gloves because we may have to manipulate the once we get it all epoxied on there, we're going to have to manipulate the angled aluminum so it's flush with the LCD monitor side. So we don't want to get epoxy on our fingers or our hands or anything like that. So we just take the first one here. We just take our little stick here, and then we just kind of apply it on there. Put a generous amount on there. Okay. And once you put it on there, then we're going to set that on the first block here. And we're going to take our angled aluminum. And again, you're going to center the angled aluminum bracket onto the LCD side there. And don't worry if it slips right now, because once we put the clamp on there, we'll get it all straightened out. So we're going to take the second one now and do the same thing. Again, we're just going to put a generous amount on there on the bottom. Smooth it out there. Okay, and then we're going to take our other epoxy wood dowel there, and then again, just center it, just eyeball it, just get it centered. And once we get it centered there, then we'll get our 18-inch trigger clamp. Okay, so now that we got somewhat aligned here, we're going to get our 18-inch trigger clamp and expand it, and we're just going to put it in between the wood dowels there, and we're just going to start adjusting it. Once we get it a little tighter, once we get it a little tight, then we're going to again adjust the angled aluminum on the LCD monitor. We want to make sure again that it's flush with it. Make sure it's as flush as possible. And once we make sure that it is flush there, then we're going to tighten it a little bit more. You don't want to over tighten it, but we want to make it tight enough to where it's going to the epoxy is going to apply and glue onto the side of the LCD monitor. You don't want to overdo it, or else you may crack the monitor. But you can put a little bit of pressure on there without it doing that. And that's about it. So we're going to let this sit for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to come back to it and make sure that the epoxy is not seeping and gluing to the wood. So after 30 minutes, we're going to move this around to make sure the epoxy is not seeping out and attaching to the wood. This is very important because you don't want it sticking to the table, and you don't want it sticking to the wood dowels, or else you're just going to have a hard time getting it off. So as you can see where I moved it there, the glue got onto the table a little bit, and it started to adhere. So by moving that, it allows it to not adhere to the table anymore. So we're going to take the clamp off right now, and I'm just going to lift it. So as you can see, the right one, it's sticking a little. So I gotta loosen it. I don't want to pull too hard on it, because if I pull too hard, it's gonna pull off that angled aluminum off the side of the LCD monitor. And if it does pull it off, it's fine. You can just epoxy it back on there, but you want to try not to, pull it off. Now the left side was a little bit better. It didn't really get glue on there or anything. But now that we've kind of cleaned that off a little bit, now we can put the wood dowels back in. And we can take our clamp again, and we can go ahead and reclamp it down. So once we clamp it back down, you want to follow the epoxy directions and how long you need to wait. But regardless of the directions, I usually wait 24 hours. I'll let this sit for 24 hours, and then that pretty much gives it enough time for it to disconnect. So with that, we'll just wait 24 hours and come back to it. Okay, so after 24 hours have gone by, we can take our bracket off. And just again, we may have to loosen it a little bit if there was any glue that remained, but it didn't in this case, and that's it. And as you can see, those brackets are now attached to the LCD monitor. And now with that done, we can move on to the next step. Okay, so now we're ready to put the LCD monitor into the wood marquee frame. So we've got our LCD monitor with the brackets on there, and then we have our wood frame that we just painted. So before we get started, we're going to peel, if we haven't already, go ahead and peel that tape off that we put on the wood nuts so that they wouldn't get painted over. And then once you peel the tape off there on the LCD monitor on the brackets, the tape that we put on there, we're going to peel the tape off on both of those sides before we continue. So once we get the tape peeled off there, we can put this in the monitor. Now the top of the monitor is where, if you look on the front of this, the metal frame around the LCD, you see where it's thicker on the top here? That indicates that's the top of the monitor. And so make sure you also note that where the top of your marquee frame is there, and make sure that the top of the marquee matches the top of the LCD monitor. So once you determine that, we're just going to slip it in. Make sure also if the cables are loose back there, while we're putting it flat on the table, you may want to tape those down so they don't interfere with what we're doing. So that's what I'm going to do. So once we do that, we can lay it flat on the table and kind of center it on the cabinet, or not on the cabinet, but center it on the marquee frame as best as you can. And once we get that centered, then we're going to go ahead and drill our holes so we can screw it in place. So we're going to screw where we made the holes bigger. The ones with the smaller holes we're not going to drill in or anything. We're just going to drill into the big holes. So you're just going to take your drill bit, your power drill with the drill bit, a 1/8 inch drill bit. You're going to center it and just use your power drill to screw it in to drill out a hole. You don't have to drill all the way through the wood. You just have to drill in enough to start a pilot hole so that we can get our screw in. So again, just center it and drill the hole, just like so. Okay, and then just pull it out, and you're going to do that for every single hole. And once we get the holes drilled, then we can go ahead and put our screws in. Okay, so we got the last hole drilled. We're just going to clean some of that sawdust from the drill. Just get that cleaned out a little bit. So we're just going to, again, just clean it out a little bit, and then put the monitor back. And basically what we're going to do is we're just going to take our number 6 1/2-inch wood screws and start screwing them down. So get your screw and get your screwdriver, and we're just going to screw in each screw. And we're going to do that for all 6 holes. Okay, so here we are. We got to the final screw hole here. We're going to screw in the screw, and once we do that last one, that should be it. The LCD monitor is in place on the in the wood marquee, and we got it in there, and that's it for this step, and we're ready to move on to the next step. So for the next step, we're going to trim the H panel so it fits properly against our new wood marquee frame for our LCD monitor. You could look at this picture here. This is the original Arcade1UP marquee, and if you notice that there's a cut there on the top, it's a 1/4 inch cut. It's cut on an angle, and what that does is it allows the H panel to slide in there about 1/4 of an inch, and it holds it in place. We're not going to make that cut as it's not needed. Not only is it not needed, it's kind of difficult to cut. You'd have to cut it, you'd have to have a router that you'd be able to set on an angle, or a router table to where you can make that cut. And it's kind of a difficult cut to do without the right tools. And because we're trying to make this as simple as possible with as few tools as possible, we are not going to try to make that cut. And instead, we're just going to trim the H panel so that it will fit in our with our new LCD marquee. So this is what the H panel looks like. So if you look, the part we're going to cut off is the part where it would normally go into that to the angled cut in the original Arcade1UP marquee. As you can see, it's got a little cut off on the left and right side. So that's where we want to make the cut. Now you'll see these pictures say no trim and with trim. After you cut it, sometimes the cut can be rough, so you may want to put some trim on there so that it kind of covers up some of those imperfections, but you don't have to. So if you decide you do not want to put any trim on it, we're going to cut 5/16 of an inch off the top of the H panel. If you decide you want to put trim on it after you cut it, then we want to cut off 7/16 of an inch off it. So again, you just have to decide whether you want no trim or you want to do it with trim. In our case, I'm going to cut it with the expectation that we're going to put trim on it. So I'm going to cut 7/16 of an inch off, whereas if you do not want trim, then you'd cut off 5/16 of an inch. Now, we could just make a measurement of the 5/16 inch or 7/16 inch and just take the jigsaw or a saw and just cut it. But we want to try to make this line as straight as possible, or this cut as straight as possible, to give it a clean look. Particularly when you put the H panel back into the Arcade1UP. So in order to do that, I've come up with 6 steps on how to do that to get as straight as a cut as possible when you do this, as this is probably the most difficult cut that you're going to do. So the first step, you're going to measure the distance from the jigsaw blade to the end of the jigsaw, as shown in the graphic for the step 1 there. You're going to take that, and then step 2, you're going to add that measurement from step 1 to the amount you want to cut off the H panel. So if you're not going to be adding trim after you cut the H panel, you're going to take the measurement from step 1 and add 5/16 of an inch to that to get a new measurement. If you're going to be adding trim after you cut the H panel, then you're going to take the measurement from step 1 and add 7/16 of an inch to get the new measurement. Then step 3, you're going to take that measurement from step 2 and measuring from right to left on the top and the bottom, you're going to measure, and then you're going to make a little mark on the top and the bottom there where that new measurement is that you got from step 2. Step 4, you're going to draw a line on the measurements you took in step 3 to complete a straight line. Then step 5, you're going to take your straight edge. In this case, I used the scrap wood that I bought, and hopefully you did the same thing as well. So you're going to take that scrap wood, use it as a straight edge, and line it up on the line you just drew. And then, just to make sure the measurement's correct, you're going to measure from the edge of the H panel to the straight edge you just put in to make sure that that measurement matches what the new measurement that you had in step 2. Then in step 6, you're going to place the jigsaw on the edge of the straight edge and begin cutting, letting the jigsaw ride the straight edge. By doing all this, we should get a straight line and be able to cut off the amount that we need off the H panel. Okay, so once we got all our materials here, now the first thing that we need to do is on our jigsaw, we need to measure from the blade to the end of the jigsaw. Okay, and then we're going to take that measurement and add 5/16 of an inch if we're not going to do trim, or we're going to add 7/16 of an inch if we're going to add trim. So taking our jigsaw here, we're going to take our ruler here, and we're going to make our measurement. So if you look at this, flip it over. If we look at this and measure it, it looks like it comes out to 1 6/16 of an inch. So since if you weren't going to put trim on this, you would take that and add 5/16 of an inch to it, so it would equal 1 11/16 of an inch. But since if you're going to put trim on it, you would take that measurement and add 7/16 of an inch to it. So in that case, the measurement would be 1 13/16 of an inch. So in our case, we're going to use the 1 13/16 of an inch. Again, your measurement's going to vary depending on the distance between the blade and the end of your jigsaw. in any case, once you get that measurement, we're going to mark it on our H panel. Starting from the end that we want to cut, we're going to measure 1 13/16 of an inch inward. So we're going to make that mark here. Make sure we got 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and we're just going to mark it right there. And you're going to need a lighter color pencil or pen to make the mark, so that shows up on the black on the H panel. So, and then we're going to do the same thing over here on the other side as well. We're going to mark 1 13/16 of an inch. Then we're going to take our little carpenter triangle here, and we're going to draw a straight line. So we're just going to draw a line, and we're going to do it on the other side. We don't have to complete the line. We just want to draw, you know, the two lines here so that we have a line to where we can put our straight edge on. So once we draw that out, then we're going to put our straight edge. Now in this case here, I'm using the scrap wood that we had, because I'm using the other end. We used it to drill holes in and stuff, but I'm using the other end as a straight edge. Now if you have another, like, there are rulers that are straight edges and there are specific tools that are straight edges, but if you bought this piece of wood like I suggested, we can use this as a straight edge because it is straight. And essentially what this is going to be used for is for the jigsaw to ride on it. So when we put our when we clamp this down and run our jigsaw across this, it will cut the 7/16 of an inch that we need to cut. So we just need to line that up on our lines that we did. So once we line up that edge on the line, we're going to clamp it down on the one end, and then and just kind of make sure that it is on that line that we just drew. And then we're going to get our other clamp here and clamp that down as well. And then once that's clamped down, we can continue. So now we got it clamped on there. We're just going to measure here. Now again, I'm measuring, because we're putting trim on this, I'm measuring 1 13/16 of an inch. That includes the 1 6/16 of an inch that I measured from the blade to the jigsaw, and then the 7/16 of an inch that I have to cut off when I put the trim on. So now we're going to use our jigsaw with our clean wood blade in there, and that jigsaw is just going to ride that straight edge. So because it's riding that straight edge, it should produce a straight line when you do your cut. So we're just kind of let the jigsaw ride it, and once it's completed, take a moment here to complete it, and there we go. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pick up that little piece and just measure it, just to make sure that it is the 7/16 of an inch that we need. And it is. So we've successfully cut that. Now if you didn't want any trim, this would measure 5/16 of an inch. So just keep that in mind. And with that, we're done. The H panel has been trimmed, and if you don't have if you decide not to have trim, you can move to the next step. Otherwise, we're going to continue on to put the trim on. Okay, so again, if you decide, when you cut your H panel, if you decide to cut it and not put any trim on it, then you can go ahead and move on to the next step. Otherwise, we're going to continue on here and put our trim on the H panel. So we're going to take our trim here, and we're going to measure about 18 inches. And we're going to measure that 18 inches, and we're going to go ahead and cut that. So we're going to take our clippers here, and we're just going to cut off, again, 18 inches off here. So once we get it cut, we're going to set aside all our, we're done with the cutting the trim. We can get rid of the ruler, and we're going to bring our H panel up here. And then we're going to put the trim on there. Okay, so what I do to get this started, because this is kind of tight, I kind of open up the end first, so I can get it on there on the edge and get it started before we start getting our mallet to hammer it down. Okay, so once we get it started at the end there, we're going to use our rubber mallet to put it in place. So when you actually start hammering this down, you see how I'm doing it straight up and down. You do not want to hit it straight up and down. You want to hit it on an angle. If you hit it straight up and down, it's not going to do anything. But when you hit it on an angle, it'll start attaching the that trim to the actual H panel. So again, start hitting a little bit and hit it on an angle, and just go across. And this will affix the trim to the H panel. So we're just going to continue doing that all the way through. Till we're done right there. Okay. And then we got our H panel there. We got a little bit of piece there that we're going to cut off. So we're just going to take our snips here again, and we're just going to cut off that end piece. And again, this is kind of hard to do. The crimps I have, the clippers I have, are really tight, and but you just want to take a little bit off. You just want to peel it off a little bit and just clip off that end so we can finish putting this on here. So finally, there we go. So it's off, and then just kind of push it in place there a little bit. So once the trim's in place, we're just going to tap a little bit on it on the top, not too hard, just kind of tap it to make sure, going up and down, just to make sure it's in place. Go across it once or twice. And then what I usually do is I lay it flat down. I kind of push on it a little bit to push down on it, just to make it make sure that it's firmly in place. Just go across it one time. And then once that's done, that's it. The trim is in place now, and now we can go ahead and move on to the next step. Okay, so we're going to finish assembling the LCD marquee. By that we mean we're going to put the border, the plexiglass, and the top and bottom angled aluminum, and screw those in place so the plexiglass is held in place, and basically just finish assembling it. So if you look at the front view here, you can see the marquee angled aluminum. The 1/2-inch leg is going to go across the front, which would be across the plexiglass. And you're going to have, if you look at the left side view, how this is sandwiched together. So you have you have the wood marquee that has the LCD monitor in it. Then you have your border you'll put on top of there. Then the plexiglass, and then you're going to put your angled aluminum on the top and the bottom. And where the screw holes are, that's where you're going to put the screws in. And that's going to hold everything in place. And if you look at the top side view, you'll see that the 3/4 inch leg of the angled aluminum is going across that, and you have your screw holes, and that's of course where we're going to drill so we can put the screws in to hold everything in place. As for the marquee border, this is something that you'll have to cut out with the poster board that was recommended for you to buy. It doesn't necessarily have to be poster board. I mean, you can just tape it up and do whatever you want to. I just use poster board. And if you want to go by my measurements, these are the measurements that I did. So it's just going to be 17 3/4 inch by 6 inch. And as you can see, the middle and the white there is cut out. But the top would be 3/16 of an inch. The bottom would come up 7/16 of an inch. Coming from the left to the right would be 1.5 inches. And then coming from the right to the left should be 1 9/16 of an inch, with that white area inside there being the cutout. Now again, this is going to vary from project to project, and these are just my measurements, but these should be close. But again, your measurements may be a little bit different, so you'll have to actually measure and decide how you're going to cut it out. But if you want to try this and cut it out this way, this should work. And so you just get your poster board out and make your measurements, and then cut out the middle part there. And once you get that cut out, we can go ahead and assemble the the LCD marquee. Just one final note to this. Now, I just use black poster board, but you can make this any color you want, or you can decorate the border any way you want to. Just keep in mind that although this is 6 inches in height, the angled aluminum is going to come down a ½ inch and obscure a ½ inch from the top and the bottom. So you only have 5 inches to work with if you're going to create like a decorative border. So just keep that in mind, that the ½ inch on top and ½ inch on the bottom are going to be obscured by the angled aluminum if you go that route. Okay, so now we're ready to assemble this frame completely. So we have our marquee frame with our LCD monitor in it. We have our marquee border. We have our plexiglass that's been cut. And then we have our two top and bottom angled aluminum cuts there that are painted. So this is what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to assemble everything and leave all the protective film on the LCD monitor and on the plexiglass, because we want to assemble everything first and then drill our holes, and then we're going to unassemble it and then take off all the most of the protective film. So the first thing we want to do, we want to put our marquee frame down on the monitor. Then we want to put our plexiglass on top of that. Now we want to line up the plexiglass to the bottom of the frame, and you'll notice that on the top there's going to be it's not going to line up with the top, and that's fine. We just need it to line up with the bottom. So we're going to take one of our aluminum angled cuts here, and we're just going to put it on the bottom here. So we're not going to screw anything in yet. We're just going to push everything down on it, so that plexiglass is going against it on the bottom, and make sure that we line everything up on the side so nothing's coming out on the left or the right. And then once we do that, we're just going to lift it up a little bit, and we're just going to kind of hold it in place and set everything on top on the angled aluminum on the bottom. Then we're going to take our other angled aluminum cut, and that's going to be on the top. So once we put that there, we're just going to kind of hold it in place, and then we're going to take our drill with our 1/8 inch drill bit here in a moment. Once we get everything situated. And here's our drill, and then we're just going to we're going to go to the center of that hole, and we're just going to drill down. And we want to drill all the way through. We want to drill all the way through the to the top of the frame, all the way in. So we're going to drill all the way down in slowly, and then we're going to come out. And once we get that in there, once we drilled, then we're going to put a number 6 ½ inch screw in there, and take our Phillips head screwdriver and screw that down. So we're just going to adjust that there, and then we're just going to screw it down. And then we're going to do the same thing for the other side. And you'll see that I'm getting black paint on me. That's because I didn't allow this to dry enough, so I apologize for that. So that's the other thing. You should make sure that your painted angled aluminum and everything else is dry. And I didn't do that. But anyway, you just drill your second hole and get another number 6 ½ inch screw. Get it in there and just screw it in. And don't worry about cleaning up the dust, the sawdust there. We'll clean that up momentarily, because again, we'll be taking this apart again to take off all our all the film off the LCD monitor and the plexiglass. So after you get the 2 screws in there, that should hold it in place, and now we can flip it over. And we're just going to do the same thing on the other side. We're just going to line it up right, and take our drill, screw in slowly all the way in, and then come back out. And then we're going to and I know the camera's off here, so I apologize, but we're going to take our another number 6 ½ inch screw, take our Phillips head screwdriver, and screw that down to hold it in place. And once we get that screwed down, we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. Again, just kind of holding it and then drill. Watch your fingers. And then again, with our number 6 half-inch screw, we're going to put that in. And then screw it down. And now we have it, and that's pretty much it. We have it assembled. Now with everything assembled, as you look, it's going to hold that plexiglass in place, so we don't have to screw down the plexiglass. The angled aluminum is going to hold that in place. So now that we got everything assembled, now we're going to disassemble it. And the reason why we want to disassemble it now is because now that we got everything assembled, we're going to take the protective film off the LCD monitor, and we're going to take one end of the protective film off the plexiglass. So then that would be our final assembly once we get everything unscrewed. Okay, so once we got everything disassembled again, we're going to do the same thing, except this time we're going to take off the protective film off the LCD monitor and get that aside. So now what I'm going to do is, what I normally do is I take my friction tape, and I'm going to just tape the edges here, the silver edges, just so that if I'm off on my border that I created, it just makes the border black if I miss something instead of silver. So I'm just going to put that on there. And it's going to take a minute for me to put it on there, and just kind of go across there, tape it down, and then just rip it off. And then I'm going to do that for every single side. So I'm going to tear off the friction tape, and then get it taped down. Make sure it's smooth. Now I'm going to do that again. I'm going to do that on all the edges here on across the monitor. So once I get the tape on there, then I'm going to put the marquee border on top of that. And then we're going to put the marquee plexiglass on there. Now before I put this on there, I'm going to take one side of the protective film off this. So we're just going to peel that off. Set that aside. And this is going to go on top of it. The side we just peeled off is going to go on top of the marquee border. We're just going to flip it around here. Just make sure you try to hold this with the sides and try not to touch the actual plexiglass so you don't get fingerprints all over it. So once we line this up properly, we're going to put our angled aluminum back on. And before we do that, we're going to peel off a little bit of the protective film, about a ½ inch from the bottom, so that we can put our angled aluminum back on. We don't want to peel the whole thing off just yet until we get it installed in the Arcade1UP, but we need to get a ½ inch freed up so that we can put the angled aluminum back on. So once we get that peeled up there, and once we get that lined up, we'll put the angled aluminum back on. Okay, so once we get the angled aluminum line back up again, we're going to put a number 6 ½ inch screw back in, and we're going to screw that in place. So we're going to take our Phillips head screwdriver and screw it in. And once we get that screwed in, we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Again, number 6 ½ inch screw, and screw it in. And then once that's in place, then we can flip it up. And again, doing the same, we're going to do the exact same thing on the top. We're just going to peel about a ½ inch down. I'm sorry about my camera angle, but we're just peeling a ½ inch down, and we're going to place our angled aluminum on the top there. And once we do that, we'll line it up properly, and then we'll screw that in place. Okay, so now we got the angled aluminum back screwed in on the top there. And so now we got everything in place. Now all we have to do is put the wood strip on the back and attach it back to the bottom here. So after we do a little bit of cleanup, we'll go ahead and put that wood strip back on there. Okay, so we have our wood strip here, and it's already the brackets are already on there. So all we have to do is screw them back down to the back of the marquee. So again, we're going to take a number 6 1/2-inch screw, find our screw hole here, and then screw down that end, that down in place, and then we're going to get another number 6 1/2-inch screw and do the other side. So we're going to take that screw, put it in place. And with that screwed down, that's it. The LCD marquee is now assembled, and it's pretty much assembled, and we're ready to put this in the Arcade1UP. So now we're ready to put all the components into the Arcade1UP and reassemble the Arcade1UP. So you should have 3 things right now. So we have the LCD board, we have our LCD marquee fully assembled, and then we have our H panel that's been trimmed off at the top there. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put in the LCD monitor board into the Arcade1UP. So the first thing we're going to install is the LCD driver board, and this is what it looks like. And if you've actually set, if you looked at, if you set up your Arcade1UP following ETA Prime's video, you're probably familiar with this board. So the board's going to go into the Arcade1UP, and it has 3 cables that are going to come out of it. Now, 2, when you pull it out of the package, 2 are already connected, and then the 3rd one, which is the control panel, is the one that you have to plug in yourself. But in the off chance that none of the cables are plugged in, this is how you'd plug up the LCD driver board. Okay, so the first cable we'll look at here is the what's called the 30-pin LVDS interface. This is essentially where the monitor plugs in. So this is the monitor cable. Now you be very careful where you plug. You have to plug this in correctly. If this is not plugged in correctly, you will fry your board. So this should already be plugged in, but again, if you do have to plug it in, notice the 2 red cables there at the end. This is the indication of where this cable should be plugged in. It should be plugged into the left, where the first and second cable, those 2 red cables should line up and be plugged in. And again, if you do not plug this in correctly, you will ruin your board and you'll have to purchase a new one. So just make sure that it's in there, and if it's already plugged in, don't bother unplugging it, just leave it plugged in. Okay, so the next connection we're going to look at is for the inverter board. This is basically a cable that connects to another board where your bulbs will plug in. This is just easily plugged in. It'll only plug in one way, so you don't have to worry about where the cables go. So just and again, this should already be plugged in when you take it out of the packaging, but if you have to plug it in, this is where the inverter board would go. And finally, we have the control panel port. It's labeled here as keyboard, but this is where the control panel is. And of course, the control panel has your power and your other buttons for contrast, brightness, and things of that nature. So this, again, it only plugs in one way. And it's not plugged into the board when you take it out of the packaging. You have to plug it in yourself. But again, as I stated, it only plugs in one way, so you shouldn't have any trouble plugging this in. Okay, so now we know where all the cables are and where they need to go. We can now put this into the Arcade1UP. So now we're going to put the LCD driver board into the Arcade1UP. I usually put it on the left side of the monitor frame. That way it's close to the LCD monitor to where I can plug in the monitor and everything else. So I'm just going to place it right there. What I do to place this, I use double-sided tape. I use about 3 strips of it because of how my monitor is set up. so that the HDMI cable can go through to it. I also unplugged the control panel cable. I will plug that in later as we put in the LCD monitor, but once I put the double-sided tape on, we can put it on. So once you get the double-sided tape on there, then you're just going to stick it on there. And again, make sure the board does not touch any of the metal. And again, you may have to use 2 or 3 strips of double-sided tape in my case, because it has to, I have to get the HDMI cable in there. If you want to screw it in place too, you can. But anyway, you're just going to put a little bit of pressure on there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to attach the inverter board. And I usually attach that to the right of it. And again, just going to get some double-sided tape here. And I'm going to put that on the back of the inverter board. And then I'll attach that to the back of the monitor bezel as well. So once you get the double-sided tape on there, we can... I usually put it on the right side of the LCD driver board. So just kind of put it in place, push down firmly on it to put it in place, and that should hold it there. And then once we got that, then what I do is I usually plug in the control panel. So remember, this just plugs in, it only goes in one way once you plug it in. Once we get that plugged in, that should be it for right now. And then next step would be to put in the LCD marquee. Okay, so now we're going to take our assembled LCD marquee. As you see, I have my 4 wood dowels again. So I'm going to put those into the side of here. Now, 3 of these are going to go in just fine, and the sides of the monitor should, prevent them from going all the way through, as you can see here. So the side of this monitor is blocking those 2, and then this 3rd one should have enough to where it blocks it. However, this one to the this last one, there's not enough room for it to block it, so it goes all the way through. So we're just going to put some friction tape there, or it can be any type of tape. We just happen to have friction tape here to kind of block that hole. So I'm just going to peel off 2 pieces here. So I'm just going to peel off the first piece, and then I'm just going to cover up that hole. And again, you don't have to do this, but I like having the dowels in there because it just lines it up to where I can put my screws in pretty easily. So again, just kind of put it there and then peel off another piece of tape and then put that on there as well. And once you do that, then we're ready to put this LCD marquee into the Arcade1UP. Okay, so now we're ready to put the LCD marquee back into the Arcade1UP. So just make sure that the 2 cables in the back there are taped. They should be taped. And just make sure it doesn't crimp them on the back there. But anyway, just line up the dowel holes like you did in a previous step. You may have to pull the side of the monitor a little bit to get it in there and pop it in place. And then once it's popped into place and looks good, that's it. Now I got my 2 10-32 1-inch screws, but we're not going to screw them in just yet. We're going to start attaching the cables in the back to the LCD marquee from the LCD driver board. Okay, going back to the back of the Arcade1UP. So we're going to take our 2 lamp cables and we're going to plug them into our inverter board. And again, these only plug in one way, so don't force them in. They just go in one particular way. So if it doesn't go in one way, put it in the other. It doesn't matter which cable plugs into which one. It doesn't matter. They're just there to power on the lamps for the LCD monitor. So just go ahead and plug those in. And then what I do is I take some of my friction tape. Once I do, and I kind of tape that down to that wood strip so that they don't get in the way once we put the H panel in. So we'll just take a strip off there and just kind of tape those cables down. And then once we get those down, then we'll move over to the monitor cable. So here's the monitor cable, and that's going to plug in. Again, it only plugs in one way into the LCD monitor. But be very careful. This is a very thin connection. So you want to make sure, I'm sorry about the camera being a little bit off, but it just kind of slides in. But again, this only goes in one way, so you just want to make sure it goes in correctly. So again, I apologize for the camera angle on this, guys. On my camera, I thought I had it viewing the plugging into the back of the monitor. Obviously, that didn't happen. However, I just want to stress again to be very careful plugging this in. Again, it only goes in one way, and the way that where I've got it angled right now, it's a little difficult to get in. But again, it only goes in one way, and the connector is really thin, so you just have to be very careful not to break it. Okay, so once you get the monitor cable in place, we're just going to do the cable itself. We're just going to tape that down just to get it out of the way a little bit. So we're just going to take some friction tape, or any tape will do, electrician tape, whatever. I just use friction tape. And we're just going to put a strip here and just kind of tape that down to get it out of the way, so when we put our H panel in there. Now, as far as the control panel goes, I put it on the top here, and again, forgive my camera angle here, but I usually put it in the top right corner. I'll put some double-sided tape on there. But you can put it on the inside right here if you want, if you don't want it showing. I like to put it in the upper right corner here, because I like to turn off my monitor when it's not in use, so it has to be on the outside. But again, if you want it hidden and you want to put it on the inside and don't mind your monitor being on all the time, that's fine too. It's just a matter of how you want to do it, and you just decide how you want to do it, and we'll go ahead and put the tape on there and tape it in place. Okay, so I'm going to put the double-sided tape on the control panel. Since I'm putting it in the upper right corner here, I want to make sure that the double-sided tape covers the full control panel. And this is because I don't want any of the connections there on the back to make contact with the metal on the back of the LCD monitor. So just make sure it's all covered completely before you tape it on there if you decide to do it this way. If you decide to put it on the wood strip back there, then you don't have to worry about this. So once you put it in place, now I'm going to tape down this cable as well. Okay, so once I tape it in place, and it's a little tight, and that's fine. I just want to tape it down so it doesn't get in the way when we put the H panel in. So now once I got everything plugged in, I'm going to go ahead and plug in my HDMI cable and my 12-volt power supply into the board there. So I already have the 12-volt AC adapter plugged in. I'm going to unplug my Raspberry Pi 2 before I plug everything up. So again, there's my and again, I apologize for the camera angle, but I've got the HDMI cable here, so I'm going to plug that up at first. So I'm just going to go ahead and plug that in, and then I'm going to plug in the 12-volt power as well into the LCD driver board. Okay, so now that we have our HDMI cable plugged into it and our 12-volt power supply plugged into it, I'm ready to turn on the secondary Raspberry Pi. And again, if you had a PC hooked up to this, you just power on your PC, but I'm powering on the secondary Raspberry Pi. Once it comes up, come up to the front here, and as you can see, it's coming up. So ready to peel off the protective film off the other side of the plexiglass, so we can go ahead and peel that off. As you can see, it's coming up just fine. Just set that aside. And now that we see that it's coming up and everything looks good on the LCD side, we can go ahead and begin to put in the H panel. Okay, so for the H panel, we're just going to line it up into the grooves and pop it in place. So it'll take a moment to get it popped in place. Just make sure it's lined up properly. And once we get it lined up, then we can screw the 2 screws for the marquee side and put in that screw on the bottom right there. So the first thing we want to do is put the first screw in on the LCD marquee. So just make sure it lines up properly and start screwing it in. And once you get in there, you don't have to over tighten it. Of course, you want to get it tight enough, but you don't want to over tighten it to where you could break something. So just take a moment to get this screwed in. And then once we get that screwed in, then we will screw in that other silver screw over there onto the right there. So I'm going to get this tightened up. Once we do, then we'll go ahead and screw this one back in. Just make sure that that board in the back, it's all lined up with the dowels and that before you screw it in. But again, just go ahead and screw it in. And then after you get that screwed in, then we're going to go ahead and go to the right side of the marquee and screw that in. And once we get that final screw in there, that's it. The LCD monitor is in place, and we can turn this on and we can test everything to make sure that the marquees are showing up and working properly. Okay, so this final step is if you're using a second Raspberry Pi for your LCD marquee. So when you start a game up, you're going to notice something very quickly, and you're going to notice that the marquee that's being displayed is not displayed properly. As you can see here, what's going to happen is you're going to see that it doesn't take up the full screen, and it's scrunched, to use a word. So we need to fix that, and that's a resolution issue. But the other issue that you're going to notice is that if you go to a different system, like in my case, I'm going to go to Sega Genesis, and if you have marquees for that, or for any other system for that matter, it's not going to show up. It's not even going to change the marquee display. And this is because in the original code, it's not counting for spaces. Most other emulators use spaces in their ROM names, so it's not going to display the marquee. So we're going to go fix those issues now. We have to go to a Windows machine to address these issues. So the first thing we're going to fix is the problem with Genesis, NES, etc. games with the marquee not displaying at all. And this is a line of code that we have to fix on our LCD Marquee Raspberry Pi. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to run WinSCP. Now, if you followed my video on how to set up the second Raspberry Pi for your LCD monitor controller, you should already have this installed. But if not, just follow the embedded link below to download the program and install it. So once you get it installed, run WinSCP. And for the host name, you're going to type in the IP address of your second Raspberry Pi. And then for the username and password, it's going to be Pi. And the password is going to be Raspberry. Unless you change the password, then you type in the password that you changed it to. Once you type that in, we're going to click Login. Okay. And on the right side, you're going to see two folders, bin and marquees. So you want to go into the folder that says bin. And you're going to see a file that says simpleserver.py. You're going to right click on that file, go to edit, and then select edit. And this is going to open up the file for you to edit. So in this case, we're going to click the find icon, which is a pair of binoculars on the menu bar. So you're going to click on that. And in the find what field, you're going to type in CMD space equal space quotation mark SUDO and click find next. Once you click find next, you'll see down below it highlighted what line we want to go to. So you can cancel the find command, and we can scroll up a little bit just so we can see the full command line. So on this line here, we're not going to do anything with this line. We're going to remark it out. So we're going to go to the beginning of that line and type in a pound symbol, and then go to the end of that file and hit enter. And we're going to hit the space bar a few times to line up the text, and then the command that we're going to type in, we're going to type in CMD space equal space quotation mark SUDO space FBI space dash VT space 1 space dash A space dash dash NOVERBOSE space backslash quotation mark, another quotation mark, space, plus sign, space, the word path, P-A-T-H, space, plus sign, space, quotation mark, backslash, quotation mark, and then another quotation mark. So once we have that line typed in, we're going to click the save icon on the menu bar, which is a disk, a single disk, floppy disk I should say. We're going to save that. Once it's saved, it should gray out, indicating that it's saved. And we're going to close the file. And at that point, you can close out WinSCP. And so that's the first part. And then now we're going to go to the second item that we have to fix. Okay, the second configuration we have to make, we have to fix the resolution on the screen to display properly. So to do that, we're going to do that through PuTTY. Now again, if you followed the video that I provided on how to set up a second Raspberry Pi for your LCD Marquee, you should already have this installed. If not, just follow the embedded link below to install it. So we're going to go ahead and open up PuTTY. And we're going to type in the IP address of the second Raspberry Pi that we're using as the LCD Marquee. And then we're going to log in as Pi. And the password again is Raspberry. Unless you changed your password, then you type in your password there. I'm going to type in clear to just clear the screen. So once we get to a command prompt, we're going to type in the commands sudo sudo space raspi dash config. This will bring us into the Raspberry Pi configuration page. Once we get in there, we're going to scroll down to option 7, advanced options, hit enter, and then we're going to scroll down to option A5, resolution, set a specific screen resolution, and hit enter. Now the resolution that we want to apply here, if we scroll all the way down, we want DMT mode 85, 1280 by 720, 60 hertz, 16:9 ratio. So once you find that, hit your tab button so that OK is selected, and press enter to click OK. It's going to come up with a confirmation message saying the resolution is set to DMT mode 85. Make sure OK is selected and press enter again to OK that. And then once you're back up to the main screen, tab over where it says to go to finish. And once you tab over there and select it, hit enter. And now it's going to ask you, would you like to reboot now? Select yes and hit enter. And you hit enter and it's going to come up with a message saying a fatal error, and that's fine because the LCD Marquee is rebooting, the Raspberry Pi is rebooting. And if you look over to your Raspberry Pi, you'll notice that it's coming up and it should be at the correct resolution. So we're going to close that out and close PuTTY out again. And then we're just going to wait for it to come back up. And once it comes back up, we'll go ahead and start PuTTY again. Okay, so once you verify that your LCD Marquee is back up again, we're going to go back into PuTTY. And again, we're going to type in the command, the IP address of your Raspberry Pi that's on the LCD Marquee. And we're going to log in again, Pi, and then your password, which should be Raspberry, unless you changed it. Sure you type it in correctly, unlike me. So again, we're going to go back into that command, the Raspberry Pi configuration. So we're going to type again. We're going to type in sudo space raspi dash config and hit enter. Now, and we're going to go into advanced options again, and we're going to go to A2 overscan. Okay, and then we're going to tab where it says select it. And it's going to say, would you like to enable compensation for displays with overscan? We're going to say yes. And we're going to hit enter. It's going to say that it is enabled. Press enter to hit OK. and then we're going to finish. It's going to ask, do you want to reboot? Yes. And again, it's going to reboot again. We're going to wait for that, again, get the message, just click OK, and then close out, and then we're going to wait for it to reboot, and then we're going to go back into it one more time. Okay, so now that we've enabled overscan, now we're going to go back and disable overscan. Now the reason I've done this is because when I've set up these monitors before, sometimes when you set the resolution, sometimes it just acts a little squirrely, to say the least. So for good measure, I just turn on overscan and then I turn it off again. And you do not want to leave overscan on permanently, because what happens, what I found, is that about every 2.5 to 3 minutes, your LCD display is going to flash. It's going to like go off and come back on again, and so we don't want that to happen. So we want to turn off overscan. So we just wanted to only enable it once, and then we want to turn it off. So again, you're going to go into PuTTY, type in your IP address again, and we're going to log in one more time. And again, we're going to type in sudo space raspi-config. And then we're going to go to advanced options. Again, go to overscan. And then this time we're going to tab over to where it says no. And we're going to enter no. It's going to come up and say display overscan compensation disabled. Hit OK. Go to finish, tab to finish. And once you select it, hit enter. It's going to say, do you want to reboot? Hit enter for yes. And once you get you'll get the fatal error again, because it's rebooting. And that should be it. The resolution should be set properly now. And now we can go to the final setting to fix on our LCD marquee for these marquees to display properly. Okay, so finally we want to resize the marquee files to match the resolution, or else they're still not going to display properly. So again, we're going to open up PuTTY again. We're going to type in the IP address of the marquee, or the Marquee controller, which is the secondary Raspberry Pi. Then we're going to log in as Pi. Password is Raspberry, unless you changed it. Looks like I may have typed it in wrong. There we go. And I'm just going to clear the screen. Okay, so the first thing we want to do, we want to change to the marquees directory. So we're going to type in cd space marquees. And then I'm going to type in the letters ls. This will list all the folders and files. And you'll notice that, now you may have multiple folders here, depending on how many, depending on what marquee files you want to show for each system. So this one, I have one that's arcade, which is all my arcade games, and then I have Mega Drive, which has a few Sega Genesis games in there, just to give as an example. And then you have one file that's default.png, and this is the default graphic that comes up after you exit a game. So we have to go into, we're going to start with the marquees folder, but after this we have to go into each individual folder and run this same command. You could create a program that automatically recruits in each subdirectory and does this, but I just go into each one individually and run this. So first, now that we're in marquees, we're going to run the command to change that default.png file to the correct resolution. So we're going to type in sudo space MOGRIFY space dash resize space 1280 by 720 exclamation point space star.png. Now I should mention before we hit enter on here, this command is part of Imagic, and if you followed my documentation or followed my video that I did on building a secondary Raspberry Pi for your Marquee controller, part of the steps was to install Imagic onto that device, and the reason why we did it was because of situations like this. So if you don't have so if this command comes up and says it doesn't work because it's not installed, then you'll have to go back to that video and go back to the documentation in there in the video to find the step where it says to install the Image Magic K. So once you have the command typed in, we just hit enter, and it'll take a second, and it should resize that file. And then now we have to go again. Now we have to go through each subdirectory that's in there. So next we're going to go to Arcade. So we're going to type in ls space Arcade. Or I'm sorry, we're going to type in CD Arcade. My bad. Okay, and you'll notice that we're in the Arcade now. And then we're just going to hit the up arrow so we get that command again. Once we get the command again, we're going to hit enter. Now, it doesn't notify you what it's doing anything, so you're just going to have to be patient, particularly if you have a lot of marquee files in there. So I only have 5 in here at this time for demonstration purposes. But if you have like 100, 200, 300 image files, it's going to take some time for this to complete. It can take up to an hour to complete. It may even take longer. You just have to wait and be patient with it. Because it's converting every single PNG file that it finds, it's converting it to that 1280 by 720 resolution. So, and even as you can see, even with 5 files, it's taken quite a while to do. And now that it's done with the 5 files on there, but again, if you got hundreds of files in there, it's going to take a while. It's going to take up, it could take up to an hour, so just be patient with it. So, with that, so once that's done, now we can go to the next subfolder, which is Mega Drive. So we have to go back to, first thing we're going to do is going to type in CD space Attila / Marquees / in this case Mega Drive. Hit enter. Now I'll bring you to the next subfolder. And again, hit the up arrow again until you get your command again. And then once you do that, hit enter. And again, same thing with the Arcade. If you got hundreds of marquee files in here, it's going to take a while. In this case, I only have 3 files in there, so it should come back up here in a minute. But again, you just have to be patient and let it run its course. And so now you would go ahead and repeat these same steps if you had more folders. For example, I only have Arcade and Mega Drive as an example here, but you may have NES, you may have Daphne, you may have SNES. So essentially what you'd have to do is you'd have to repeat the steps. So you'd have to type in CD space Attila / Marquee / and the next directory you want to go to, which in this case may be NES. So you type in CD space Attila / Marquee / NES. Just make sure it's all lowercase because it is case sensitive. Hit enter. Hit the up arrow key to get the Griffey command, and then you just hit enter and let that update all the marquee files in that folder. And you keep repeating that until all your folders have been, all your files have been updated in all your folders. And so once you've updated all your folders, we are done. So basically what we would do is we're going to close out a putty here. And then everything should be completed. And we can go back to our Arcade1UP to make sure all the settings have taken properly. Okay, so now we've got all our settings correct. Now we'll go into, I'll just go into DigDug here in a moment. And as you can see now, once it pops up, the marquee is there. It's full size. It's taking up the full screen. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and exit out of here. And I'll try another game. We'll go ahead and try 1943, which is another game that I set the marquee for. And as you can see, the default graphic is displaying properly and it's taking up the full screen. So I'm just going to go to 1943 just to show you that it is taking up the full screen there. And there you go. And that's taking up the full screen as well. And I'm also going to exit out of this game and I'm going to go back to my Genesis. And the Genesis marquee should show up as well. Excuse me. So when I'm going to go into a Genesis game and the marquee is going to show up properly now. now that we fixed the file to allow for spaces to be in the file name. And that's it. You've successfully put in the LCD Marquee into your Arcade1UP. Again, I hope this was helpful for some people. Again, I tried to make this as simple as possible with as few tools as possible, and I hope I succeeded in that. And again, if you have any questions, you can post them in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer anything that I can about this project. It was a fun little project for me, and I think the result, it came out well. And hope it did for you as well. And thanks for watching the video.